When accused of writing stories that were mere escapism, J.R.R. Tolkien, Jonathan Ronald Reuel Tolkien, considered by many to be the father of modern fantasy, had this to say about the sort of person who would even bring up such an accusation. Not only do they confound the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter, but they would seem to prefer the acquiescence of the quisling to the resistance of the patriot. To such thinking you have only to say, the land you loved is doomed, to excuse any treachery, indeed to glorify it. This came from a man who lived through the Blitz, among the other horrors of World War II, and served actively in the military in World War I. When he spoke about the importance of fantasy as a part of our lives, he knew exactly what he was talking about. Gamers are not necessarily escaping from reality with their games, although it is possible to lose yourself in them, to turn them into something unhealthy. But, well, that's possible with just about any habit when taken too far. One way that we use games in a positive manner is to refresh ourselves, to play out and explore our ideals in ways not often possible in the real world, and occasionally to approach real-life issues through the lens of our games. And, as an incidental aside, if you'd like to read the works of a genius who is able to do that masterfully well with the fantasy genre, I recommend the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. I only regret that I didn't become fully aware of his works until after he was already dead. Rather than using them like a drug to dull our senses, we can use our role-playing games like one would use any hobby, letting off steam in a safe environment, sublimating our lesser desires into a greater creative effort, and generally preparing ourselves to sally forth to once again fight the good fight that is our daily grind. That's about as good an introduction as anything to our next question under consideration, namely, who are your players? In any work, one of the first things you need to figure out is your audience. Remember that term, audience. It's on the test at the end. Your audience are the people who are most likely to encounter the work in question, the people for whom that work is intended. If you're a lawyer and you're writing up a brief, then your likely audience is made up of your fellow legal professionals. If you're a doctor and you're writing up a prescription form, then your likely audience is made up of the pharmacists who will fill out the prescription and your patients who will be taking it later. If you're a game master, your audience is probably composed of role players or people who want to become role players, and you should consider them carefully, especially since you're going to be working with them to craft your game together. You create and populate the world, and they take the roles of the protagonists of the story that you're going to tell as a team. So, that lends some extra incentive to these two all-pervasive, all-important questions that you need to ask yourself before you start play. Who is my audience for this game? And what do they want from me? If you're going to answer that first question with any degree of accuracy, you really need to collect information on your players and write it all down. Go all J. Edgar Hoover on your players. Take notes on their hates, loves, fears, interests, anything. Keep track of their relationships, their tastes, their favorite foods, their general personality notes, anything you can think of and everything you can think of. You are doing this because you want to be able to tailor your stories to better suit their needs and wants, sometimes even the needs and wants they didn't know existed. Of course, when you're in doubt, you can always ask, and that's more than fine. Try not to be too creepy about gathering information, too, and let them know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and make sure they're okay with it. You might take note of birthdays and other special occasions for a player, not just because you're their game master, but because you're their friend, and you want to do nice things for them to commemorate those important times. Also, keep track of intergroup relationships. I mean the players, by the way, not their characters. Does somebody annoy somebody else? Which of your players get along best? what makes this so in both cases? Is one of your players kind of slow on the rules and another a teacher type who's good at helping? Is somebody a power gamer while somebody else is a bit poor at optimizing their characters? What is the ideal arrangement for your players at the table? This will probably take some trial and error, especially if you want to be at least semi-subtle about it. One way to try out new table configurations is to ask if everybody's all right with shifting around the table, or the room, or wherever you're sitting, at least for the first few sessions, just to try things out. That way you've made it clear what's happening, and your players are at least a little bit less likely to put down their roots on the first day of game. To better get to know the vital information about your players, you might make up a questionnaire. People like to talk or write about themselves. Fill out a list of questions like the ones above that I've already mentioned, or use the sample one I've made for your use, which you can find linked below this video, and adjust it however you think works best. Intersperse in-character information with out-of-character information, so as to make it clear that this is for game use only. You're using your GM powers for good, so don't turn evil on us. Already, after just reading a simple questionnaire, you should be starting to get a general idea of what sort of people with whom you will be playing. This is great. Please don't stop. Reaching out to others and developing empathy for them is perhaps the biggest skill you can ever gain as a game master, to say nothing of how it will improve you as a person. Now, let's start to think about how this established rapport and willingness to communicate will help you develop your game into something more than just a social circle. After all, you and your players aren't just there to eat fried corn-based snack foods and drink heavily caffeinated beverages. You are there to work together to tell stories for the ages, crafting the stuff of dreams from the forge of reality itself. Actually, with that statement, I bring up the next question, namely, what does each of your players expect from the game? This is the really big question, and its answers tell us so much about the players, or as was said by Richard Lingard, a 17th century Anglican priest of some note, if you would read a man's disposition, see him game. You will then learn more of him in 1 hour than in 7 years' conversation. When asked the question, what do you want from our game, a lot of players will answer, I don't know. Or at least that will be their answer the first time you ask. This is about the same with that questionnaire. Your players won't be able to instantly rattle off answers, and so their first answer to all the questions, or most of them actually, will probably also be, I don't know. And that's all right, as long as this doesn't stay their answer forever. Ask them the questions early on, and let them think about their answers while you work out the first couple adventures. As the player gets to know their character better and gets a better feel for their place in the group dynamic, and generally develops a better understanding of role-playing in your group, they will gradually come to realize what they like most about tabletop role-playing in general terms, and what they want from your game specifically. While your players are pondering the question, what do you want from our game, you should ask it of yourself. After all, you're the one running the game. You're not playing one of the heroes of the story. Actually, you're almost certainly playing a good number, if not all, of the villains. So, what do you get out of playing the game? Search inside yourself for the answer, and don't be afraid of discovering ambiguities in the process. The answers to such questions are probably going to be complicated, and that's just fine. Having said all of that, here are some of the major reasons why people roleplay. Knowing them in advance might help you and your players as you work through your personal reasons. They will almost certainly help you to begin to develop the vocabulary of the mind that will allow you to begin to articulate your personal feelings on the subject. I synthesized many of the concepts of the rest of this video from the September 16th, 2010 Psychology Today article on the appeal of fantasy role-playing games by Ethan Gilsdorf, From the September 2nd, 2015 lifehacker.com article, The Surprising Benefits of Role-Playing Games and How to Get Started by Patrick Allen. From the YouTube personality, noted game designer and author Matthew Colville. And also very generally from the website Unpossible Journeys. All of that, of course, and my own personal observations on the subject. Now that I've given you my sources and linked them below, let's get down to business with my 3 biggest reasons for why people play role-playing games. Incidentally, it is important to know why so that you can better understand how to give people what they need, including yourself. Besides letting off steam, role-playing games give their players, and their game masters as well, an opportunity to try out different life roles. Naturally, the role of hero is the most immediately appealing, but you aren't limited to playing heroes in a good role-playing game, nor should you be. Gary Gygax, creator of Dungeons & Dragons, and by extension of role-playing as a serious hobby in the modern day, coined the term murder hobos to describe a certain sort of player. This player type is a close cousin to Conan the Barbarian before he became king, and Elric of Melniboné after he quit being king. I am sure I'm mispronouncing that name. Oh well. These sorts of characters, and the players who ran them, are in it for 2 things: excitement and loot, not necessarily in that order. They have no fixed address, no ties beyond those of their immediate friends and party members, and while they might have personal codes by which they live their lives, they are often morally nebulous, and wherever they go, there is a lot of violence. And that's just fine. Sometimes we all want to play the shining knight, the paragon, in the fight of good against evil. In the real world, we typically aren't allowed to fulfill this basic desire. Actually, I think it's a need, because of the limitations of real life, not least of which is the hard reality that good and evil, and those are capitalized good and capitalized evil, with capital letters, are seldom immediately apparent in the real world. Dragons to be slain tend to be a lot more metaphorical in our world than in fantasy, and the evil empire, no matter how evil it really is or was, often turns out to be mostly populated by normal people just like us, who want most of the same kinds of things that we do, but just happen to be going about getting those things in an unfriendly manner, though not without reasons, many of them quite good, when seen from their perspective. Finally, getting an opportunity to just let loose on somebody, or better yet, something that really deserves it, can be intensely cathartic, relieving frustrations that can otherwise build to unhealthy levels and cause damage to the relationships in our lives. On the other hand, sometimes we have other urges, even needs, that can't be adequately answered by just being good. Nor should we. And note again, that's the capital G, good. Even though being evil, again, capital E, evil, based on my personal gaming experiences and observations, might be amusing for a few short sessions, most people don't find it terribly satisfying for much longer than that. And by the way, for those who do, maybe you should see if you can't get them some help, a hug, and some warm milk and cookies before things get any worse for them, poor things. Playing the murder hobo role, by contrast, gives players an opportunity to play the way they want, adjusting their levels of goodness and evilness to a point where they and their other party members feel comfortable. The role allows for complex characters, able to interact with a complex world in complex ways, and so serves as a perfectly suitable mirror to the real world, which really is a terribly complex place. The big difference, of course, is that in fantasy, you get to keep the option of solving your problems by hitting them with a really big sword or a fireball to the face, and at the same time, these so-called murder hobos still get to be the good guys, the chosen ones, the saviors of the universe, and the heroes of the story. How awesome is that? Besides being a chance to let off steam and play the role of protagonist, role-playing is also an opportunity to play out, as the name of the hobby suggests, different roles. In the real world, you're born into a particular body, and while you might manage some relatively minor adjustments to that body over the course of your life, what you get at the moment of conception is really the sum of the raw material you're allowed to use in those adjustments. In other words, if you're born as a human of a particular race, sex, religion, and culture, chances are that you'll probably die as a human of that same race, sex, religion, and culture. Statistically speaking, we humans don't tend to mess around much with those elements of our being unless we're given some really pressing reasons. In role-playing, though, all bets are off. Want to play an elf? Well, you're a pansy, but sure, no problem. Want to play a dwarf? Heck yeah! What about a Klingon? A kitsune? A three-legged drom from Heldorak, not to be confused with the far inferior five-legged droms? Well, why not? The only limit to what you can be are the mechanics of the particular role-playing game you're using right now, and you can mess with those using house rules. Not only does trying out a new life role allow game masters and players alike to shuck off the shackles of their ordinary lives, it also allows us all an opportunity to start to see the world through different eyes. While that might sound schizophrenic at first, considering the world from the point of view of another person, even if that person is made up, is one of the first steps towards developing empathy for others. Not only is it good acting, it's also a good way to help people become more caring individuals, better friends, better parents, and better people overall. After they've finished hitting the bad guys with their really big swords, of course. As you might have gathered by now, role-playing means a lot more than just rolling up characters and rolling dice. There's a massive social element involved as well. Everybody sitting at the table with you, literally or metaphorically, as in the case of online gaming, is a social connection, a potential friend who you will get to know in great and intimate detail before you finish a particular campaign. Because of the sudden circle of friends, some players will continue to come to game sessions long after they've lost interest in the game itself, for whatever reason, simply because they like the people with whom they play. Besides being an opportunity to socialize and hence practice social skills, many people also love the opportunity to work together with other people that role-playing game offers. These team problem-solving efforts can be immensely satisfying when pulled off correctly, and even when not, they provide players with a chance to practice teamwork in a relatively safe social environment. Seriously, role-playing games help you develop key life and career skills. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't put your role-playing career somewhere on your resume, albeit couched in business-appropriate language. On mine, by the way, I list my role-playing experiences as Coordinator Weekly Conflict Resolution Meetings. I just leave off that giant swords and fireballs are among the options available for resolving those conflicts. Now that I've established the role of role-playing as a safety valve and also as a way to explore yourself through different roles and its social values as well, here's where I talk about what that means to you as the game master. Everything that I've covered for you in your role as a game master boils down into answering this one question. What do each of your players need in order to get the maximum satisfaction out of the game? Please note that I don't use the word fun here. What you want to achieve should go well beyond mere fun. Is one player focused on playing a good guy, more focused on playing a good guy than the others? Is another more focused on the maximum amount of loot? Is someone else about puzzles and problem solving? And what about that guy in the corner of the table, the one who doesn't talk much, but who seems to enjoy watching and just being around everybody else? In your role as game master, you need to know these things, and you need to respond to that knowledge appropriately, opening up possibilities in the game that can potentially satisfy the needs of all your players, at least some of the time, to some degree. To paraphrase Howard Hawks, noted director, a good game session makes at least one of your players thoroughly satisfied and leaves none of them unsatisfied. Fortunately, it's not that hard to get players willing to work with your desires too, a concept I'll deal with in much more detail in a later video on the subject of themes and theses. Rhymes with feces. If you want to run a good versus evil campaign, all you need to do is tell your players what you expect of them as the representatives of the side of good, and assuming that that's what you want, and make sure they're all right with playing that role. On the other hand, if everybody wants to run a free-form, story-light murder hobo campaign in the Western Marches style, where more focus is on the guts and the glory of an individual quest than on an overarching plot for the campaign, hey, that's great as well. What's most important is that everybody knows what to expect, agrees that this is the kind of story in which they want to participate, and is able to have fun with that style of play. As I've already hinted on several occasions, and will now explicitly say, communication is, as always, the key to making your game run, because it's the only way that you have to reach out to your audience, your players, and get to know what they want, and let them know what you want out of the game. Don't be afraid to address these issues. In fact, bring them up as soon as possible, and make sure that everyone at your table is willing to abide by the social contract of playing in your campaign. Actually, setting up a planning session where everybody gets to brainstorm what they'd like to do, what sort of campaign you're going to run for them, and then set the terms of the social contract that will bind them together for the rest of the campaign is a wonderful way to share responsibility with everyone at the table, and greatly enhance the likelihood that your players will abide by the rules of the game outside of the game. There is a fundamental rule that should go without saying for all games, and especially role-playing games. They are supposed to be fun. Again, I prefer the word satisfying, as I've said previously, but fun will suffice as a synonym. It's not just fun for some, but for all of the people at the table, and not just fun for some, but for all the people at the table. While some sessions of a game might be more entertaining than others, and different people may enjoy the same event for different reasons, all the same, that critical element of fun is what keeps all of us coming back to the hobby. As a game master, your fun in role-playing games should derive most from the amount of fun you help provide to your players. There is fun to be had, potentially, at all stages of the game, from preparation to presentation. But ultimately, what matters most is if what you have done created a game that was enjoyable for everyone involved. With this understanding that we play role-playing games for the fun of them, and that the fun of your players should be your primary focus as a game master, as well as the principal source of your own fun or satisfaction, doesn't it make sense then that you should get to know your players? When crafting any sort of work, one of the critical concerns of the creator, you in this case, should be on your audience. You want to reach out to your audience to find out what they want, what they expect, and what will make them the most happy. Ultimately, if you are doing your job correctly, the people at your game table should become your friends, if they aren't already, because your focus should be centered on them, as your audience, as your players, and as people about whom you actually care. A good game master is expected to develop empathy for the players at the table, whoever they might be. Over time, if you are genuinely interested in your players, you will develop a rapport with each of them, discovering their likes and dislikes. Some of them you will like more than others, naturally, but all the same, each of them make up a part of your audience, and that intimate association is a serious part of what can make tabletop role-playing games so much more satisfying than the many other mediums through which people can get their gaming fix. And as your relationship with your players becomes better, and you learn the critical skills of being a good game master, you'll eventually help your players move beyond mere fun and achieve true satisfaction in your gaming experiences. Hopefully you found at least some of this video to be useful or informative, or hopefully both, or possibly even fun? If so, please hit the like and subscribe buttons at your leisure. Also be aware that I'll be uploading another video in which I review the questionnaire I've been talking about, and which again I've linked below in far more detail. That will be coming up next, in fact. And with all of that said, and all of that done, I wish you all the very best.